Despite the fact that fans have been aware of editors such as Julie Schwartz or Stan Lee since the beginning of the Silver Age of comics, most readers don't understand comic book editing. They have a lot of misconceptions about it, what an editor does, what impact they have on the final product, the book that you're reading and enjoying, where they start and where the creators stop, and how this all comes together to make the product. As a sort of cure to that, I'm going to be putting together this series of videos to help hopefully educate and enlighten some of you about what an editor does in mainstream comics. These are freely adapted from a talk I give every year to the junior editors at Marvel, expanded a little bit and altered here. That talk isn't really meant for public consumption, but that said, none of the things that I'm going to tell you here or that I really talk about there are top secret or confidential. Most of it really comes down to plain common sense. So let's get started. This all does come from a very specific viewpoint on editing comic books, which is the perspective of somebody working for one of the major companies who own all of the characters and what we think of today as the IP. It's not exactly the same as it would be if you were editing on a creator-owned title or series, but a lot of the underlying ideas will still apply. The only difference there is who's establishing the goals and objectives for the organization. All right, so let's lay this out broadly. The number one rule of being a comic book editor is this phrase that I have developed over the years and that people at Marvel are sick of hearing me say. Creators get the credit, editors get the blame. That's not a complaint. That is merely a statement of fact, and anybody that gets into the business of being a comic book editor should and must understand and embrace that philosophy, because it is the bedrock on which everything else is constructed. The creators are the stars, the performers, the people who are out on stage singing and dancing and performing for the audience and getting the applause. The editors, however, are the people backstage, running the curtains, overseeing the costume changes, making sure the backdrops are in place where they need to be, making sure that everybody's on their mark when it's time to put on a show, making sure the company gets from theater to theater and is there when they're supposed to be, and everything in between. We as editors are support staff. If we do the job properly, most people should not even be aware that we are part of the process. Internally, among the company and among the creators that you work with, that's a completely different matter. But out facing the world, despite videos like this one, it's not really about you, it's about the creators that you work with. So all that being said, what is the job of the editor? I boil it down universally to a single idea. The editor is responsible. You're responsible to the company, whether that's an individual or whether that's an organization like a Marvel or DC, for making sure that the comics get done on time, that they make their print date, that their contents are up to the exacting standards of whatever company you happen to be working for, that they abide by whatever rules those companies have put in place in terms of what sort of material they want to publish and how they want to go about it. That's also true if that happens to be a creator that you're working with and it's a creator-owned situation, and that everything is as it should be on time and comes out when it's supposed to. Anything that goes wrong on any level ultimately is on you and up to you to fix and to solve, to make sure this can happen on a regular basis. Not just one time, but every single month, every single issue that gets released. As the editor, I tell my junior editors at this point, the editor is responsible, so be responsible. Take ownership of the projects that you work on. Feel that, these books, for all that nobody out in the world may know your name and know who you are, they're all a reflection of you and an extension of your sensibilities, and you want them to be the best that they can be, and read beautifully and look wonderfully, because ultimately they all have your name on it too, even if that name is a tiny one down in the credits where nobody really pays a lot of attention. You ultimately need, as the editor, to take responsibility for every aspect of the gig, which includes anytime there is a problem or an issue, being the first one to stand up to go, it's time to find a way to fix this, let's fix this. What's the difference between the job of the editor and the job of the writer? That's a complex thing, and I am boiling it down a little bit here. But in essence, the way this works is the writer, and by writer I also mean writer-artist if it is a single creator who is doing both the art and the words. The writer's first loyalty at all times is to their story, to the story that they're trying to tell. The editor, however, at least in cases like at a Marvel or DC, has a slightly different loyalty. And that is this. The editor's first loyalty is to the title, is to the book. And what that means is there are times when a writer will want to tell a story that they feel strongly and passionately about, that does something in the lives of the characters that may make for a great story at that moment, but may do damage to that character long term. And it kind of falls to the editor to be the one to say, whoa, 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 let's think this through, let's talk it out, and let's see if there's a way to do this that is additive rather than subtractive to the characters and the titles that you're working on. Additionally, it falls to the editor, again, at least in situations like at a Marvel and DC, where you are managing properties that are not owned or controlled by the creators who work on them, to determine when somebody has had enough. When they've gone as far as they can go. One of the sad truths about working on any character, Spider-Man, the Hulk, Daredevil, the Fantastic Four, you name it, is that there were a whole bunch of people who were there before you, and there will be a whole bunch of people who were there after you're gone. And it falls to the editor on any given title to determine whether or not the creative team that is laboring at that moment on a character is in condition to be able to continue to do so ad infinitum. You get to pick and choose who stays and who goes, and it's an unfortunate part of doing the gig that as much as you like all of the people that you work with creatively, you can't save everyone. There is a time at which it's time for people to pack it in, go away, and make room for the new guys. And it comes down to the editor to be the person who figures out when that is in a specific instance. The editor is the advocate of the book and the advocate of the reader. The editor is the first reader of any material that comes in. Any issue, any story, whether it's loved or hated, the editor is the first person who gets to read and experience it, and gets to try to make it a little better, a little smoother, a little more understandable by the time it reaches the racks. The editor's job is to be the eyes of that reader, to make sure the most basic information is there. Are characters identified? Are the situations that they're in clear enough? If people are using powers, are those powers obvious and understandable to somebody who maybe hasn't read the last 10 issues or a million years of backstory and continuity? Is this something that's digestible for the audience? Tom DeFalco, the editor-in-chief at Marvel when I started back in 1989, had a phrase that he used a lot, which is that the editor is a walking opinion. That's what you have to offer as an editor. The best editors have an opinion that is informed and intelligent, and they win the trust of their creators and the creative teams that they work with through not only picking at stuff or finding problems or pointing to weaknesses, but also in offering up solutions, in coming up with ideas that the creators can then run with and develop themselves and ultimately, in most cases, get credit for. And, generally by being an upstanding person whose opinion can be trusted. The same is true internally with the companies. Whoever you work for, there's going to be a hierarchy, and above you, most likely, there'll be an editor-in-chief and maybe a senior editor, and there'll be people in other departments. And the better you are at being able to convince people that your point of view isn't just a point of view, but it's actually correct, the more successful and the better you will be at being an editor. The late Mark Grunwald, who was a friend of mine and was the executive editor at Marvel when I started, also had a phrase that he used a lot, and that phrase was, the editor takes the crap, so the editor makes the rules. If you're working for a company like Marvel and DC, ultimately, the editor is the face of that company when it comes to dealing with all of the creators, and that basically means what you say goes. Like it or not, you're the adult in the room, and you have to be comfortable with wielding that authority and making people listen to that authority, so that deadlines that you might give somebody are deadlines that they take seriously and work towards. and that when you say something, particularly when you say no, you can't do that, it carries weight and holds water and doesn't become a thing where stuff just kind of gets backed into because you don't have the kind of presence or the kind of push to be able to make sure that what you're talking about comes across. All of this is still conceptual ideas before we get down to any kind of the nuts and bolts of actually editing and putting together a comic book and pulling together a creative team or whatnot. In the next installment that we do, we'll get deeper into some of the specifics as to how the editor works with the talent, with other members of the editorial department, and with the larger organization overall.